Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome back to Developer Maruf. In today's lesson, we'll learn about scope and closures in JavaScript. These are important concepts that helps us understand how variables work and how functions can remember their environment. Scope tells us where variables can be accessed. Closures let functions remember variables from their outer scope even after the outer function has finished. These concepts might seem tricky at first, but with examples, you'll understand them clearly. Let's start coding. So I've already created index.html. So let's write our JavaScript, which we already have linked. So let's start with global scope. Variables declared outside any function are in global scope, meaning they can be accessed from anywhere in your code. So I'll create three top level variables. Let's have our comment global scope, and we have const, which is global variable. I am let's say I am global. We have let global let, let's say global const, and I also global, and var global var I am global too. Okay, so now I'll log all three to show they are accessible here. Let's have our log. Let's say global const. Okay, so you can see we have accessed them inside the console. Now let's create a function to show that global variables can be accessed inside functions too. Let's have our function access global. Let's have our log here inside function global const global const, and we should call this function or invoke this function here to get value. So as you can see, we can access our global variables inside our function. This is the global const, which is this one. We can also access other let and var too. You can see we have our var let as well. So this is how the function can access the global variables. So that's global scope. Now let's learn about local scope, also called function scope. Variables declared inside a function are local to that function. So let's comment these out and let me show you here. Let's add a comment, local scope, and let's have our function, my function. So variable inside that function or any function we call as a local scope. Let's see, const, local const. I am local let is equals to I am also local, and var local var is equals to I am local too. So let's log these variables to see its value. Okay, and let's invoke this function to see the value. You can see we have all the values inside the log. So these variables only exist inside the function. If we try to access them outside, we will get the error. Let me show you. If we log here and if we say outside function local const and we call it here, we will get an error. Let's comment these out to see our log clear. You can see we got an error here, uncaught reference error. Local const is not defined because it is inside the functions, so we cannot access that outside the function because now it is a local scope. If we can access the global variable, if we uncomment this one because this is outside the function, so it is a global scope. And if we say global const, let's call it here as well, so we can see our log here because we are accessing the global variable here. So I think you get this one as well. Let's comment out. Now let's learn about blocked scope. So blocks are created by curly braces, which are these ones. These are the curly braces. So let me show you practically. Let's add a comment, block scope, and let's have our if-else state, which we have covered in our previous lessons. Let's only keep if true. Then let's define our variables here. Block const is equals to I am block scope, and let's have our let block let. I am also block scope, and let's have our var block var, which is not a block scope, it is a function scoped variable var. Let's say I am function scoped, not a block scope. If you don't know the difference between block scope or function scope, you can check our previous lessons where we have covered these scope. So let's access them inside our block, which is these curly braces is called block. Let's have our log transfer and let, Save this. You can see we have the value of all these three, so we can access them inside our block. Now let's try to access these variables outside the block. Let's have our log block const let and var, and let's comment these out to our log clearly. You can see we are having an error. Block const is not defined because const is a block scope variable, so we cannot access that outside its block, so it is throwing an error. Let's comment this out and let's see our next, which is block let. It is also a block scope variable, this let. We cannot access it outside its block, so that's why we are getting an error. Let's comment this out, and in this var we can access that outside its block because it is not a block scope variable, it is a function scope. So whether you call this inside any block or any function, we can access that outside the function or outside the block. So this is how scoping works. Let's comment these out. And okay, so now let me show you the concept of scope chain. So scope chain means inner functions can access variable from outer scope, but not the other way around. So let me show you what do I mean by that. So let's add a comment, scope chain, and let's have our const. Let's name this outer variable is equals to I am outer, and let's have our function here, outer function. Inside that we can have our const. Let's name this middle variable, I am middle, and let's have our another function which we can say inner function, and let's have our inner variable here, I am inner. So that is scope chain. We can access our outer variable inside our inner function. Let's suppose this is our inner function, so if we add logs here, let's say log inner variable, middle, and outer variable, and we should call this function here and call this outer function here. Save this. You can see we are getting all three values because we can access the outer function, middle function, and the inner inside our inner function. So this is how scope chain works. But if we log all three variables here inside this outer function and outside this function, we add this logs, middle variable, outer variable, and let's have our inner variable as well. So we should not, or we cannot access this inner variable because it is inside another function which is its inner function. So we cannot access any inner variable outside its block or outside its scope. So if we comment these out and let's save this, you can see we are only getting the value of middle variable, which is this one, and our outer variable, which is this one, and we cannot access this one because it is inside the inner function. And if we log it outside this outer function, middle and inner, let's comment these out and save this, you can see we are only getting the value of our outer variable, which is this one, because these two variables are inside the function, and we are getting our errors because we cannot access them outside because it's a const variable. So const variables are the block scope and they are inside the function. So the simple thing is inner functions can access outer variables, but outer functions cannot access inner variables. That's the scope chain. So let's comment these out as well. So let me show you another concept which we call closures. So a closure is a function that remembers variables from its outer scope even after the outer function has finished. Let me show you practically so you can understand much easier. Let's say function, let's name this outer function closure, parenthesis braces. Let's have our const variable, outer variable equals to I am from outer function, and let's have our inner function closure, and let's have our log inside this inner function accessing outer variable, and we will return this closure function, and let's invoke or let's store it inside our another variable closure function. You can directly call it, but I prefer to do it this way. If we save this, you can see we are having our log here, inner function accessing I am from outer function. So this is the concept we should always remember about the closures. Even though outer function closure has finished when we call this, but the inner function still remembers outer variable that's called the closure. We can also call it multiple times. You can see we are still having an inner function accessing the outer variable. I hope I cleared your concept about the closures. It's very simple. You will also face these kind of concepts in your interviews. You can simply answer that by saying outer function closures can be remembered by the inner function even though outer function closure has finished. This is a simple concept of closure. So try it on your own own. You can try it with the data, anything inside the parentheses and the parameters. You can access these values inside, and you just have to practice that building a grip on these kind of concepts. So that's it for today's lesson. You just learned about scope and closures in JavaScript. Scope tells us where variables can be accessed, global, local, or locked scope. Closures let functions remember variables from their outer scope even after the outer function has finished. These concepts are important for writing clean, organized code and understanding how JavaScript works. So in lesson 10, we'll learn about arrays, how to create them, access elements, and use common arrays methods. If this helped you, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone learning JavaScript. Jazakallah khair for watching. Allah Hafiz.